They are the new buzzwords in Provo, Utah surrounding BYU football, style points, and yes, they do matter if BYU wants to play in the college football playoff.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is America's #1 sports podcast network. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider as your host here on this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about style points. Kalani Sitake made his position very clear yesterday in his media session. We'll delve into that a little bit and explain why I both agree and disagree with him. Then we're going to catch up with some updates on BYU's revenue share plans that came from BYU President Shane Reese and Advancement Vice President Keith Vorkink in a podcast with the Deseret News. Very interesting. 3 key things I took away from that I had not learned before that we'll delve into. And then we'll finish up today's show with an exclusive one-on-one conversation with BYU defensive tackle Vai Fatuli. Now, I caught up with him last week and did not know, but he recently joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, I think if you listen to this interview, you'll understand a little bit more as to why I think he may have been interested in doing such a thing. We'll get to that conversation a little later on. It's all brought to you, by the way, today by our friends over at FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com today. Place your first $5 bet if you're a new customer and get $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Simple as that. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today to get started. All right, so right out of the chute here. Yesterday, Kalani Sitake held his weekly press conference, and I was the first person to ask him a question, and it was an interesting dynamic here at play because the question I asked did not match up with what Kalani Sitake answered. Now, pulling back the curtain, because as I mentioned, I have done this professionally in terms of these press conferences with BYU coaches for a decade and a half at this point in my career. So I've got a fair amount of experience with these. And one thing I've noticed about Kalani Sitake is I've covered in the entire tenure of his time leading the BYU football program is he will take questions and answer them the way he wants to answer them. And in some cases, he'll actually go back to other questions that were asked earlier on in press sessions and answer them due to other questions that don't necessarily match up. It's just, I think it's a stream of consciousness thing for Kalani, and I don't blame him one bit. He can take the questions that we posed him any which way he wants. I'm not going to fault him for that. So the question I asked yesterday was, I used the term style points, and there's been a lot talked about with style points, but I was trying to get to the angle of BYU for the third time this season is going to have Big Noon Kickoff. It's not the third time Big Noon Kickoff has been here, but at one of those pregame shows. Once for College Game Day, 2 times for BNK. It's going to be in Cincinnati. And my thought was that with all the chatter around style points for BYU football right now, could the platform that Big Noon Kickoff offers help bolster BYU's case in terms of their at-large hopes for the college football playoff? Well, Kalani Sitake heard the term style points and decided to riff on that. So I am going to play what Kalani Sitake's answer was, unedited, unvarnished, and here's what he had to say about the situation and what style points means to him as BYU's head coach.
I know about style points. I know what style points are. You know, I want to win. That's the key. You want to win. And people look at the metrics. I mean, we were favored to win by 3 points, and we won by a lot more than that. So I want to win, and I want to play at our best. And we can control the game, great. But if not, it comes down. Nothing's easy. You can't sit there going like we're going to go into this with trying to win with style. Like, I want to win the game first. And so I understand all that stuff. And people running up the score is what style is, and okay, that I understand that whole concept, but I want to win the game first. That's the key, and that's going to be our focus. But you can't sit there and claim the game before you actually play it. You got to play the 60 minutes.
There you go, Kalani Sitake. Big thank you to BYU Athletics for that video, and I appreciate Kalani Sitake's position on this, and I understand why he's a little defensive about it because he understands that BYU is chasing their postseason hopes. And the other thing about Kalani is he knows that us in the media, we're working on stories and we have stories to tell. So he is going to obviously make his position very, very clear. And I understand what he's saying there. He wants BYU obviously to win and win comfortably like they did against TCU. But I think the flip side of it is that when he continues to say that, well, winning's all that really matters for us, I get that. That's all he really can control. But in games like they had against TCU, when you are given the opportunity to kind of blow the doors open on this, I know he's talked about Lavelle Edwards not doing it to opponents, but there are instances in Lavelle's tenure at BYU that they ran it up. They reinserted, wasn't Mark Wilson to go for a single game record for passing touchdowns against Utah that caused then Utah head coach Wayne Howard to say it was going to be a task from here on out, or like a vendetta that they were going to hold against BYU. There were times Lavelle, I think, may have poured it on a little bit. I can acknowledge that freely. But the bigger point is, I think Kalani wants to make sure that his team is thought of very positively amongst his peers. And I totally understand that. But in this day and age of college football, especially when you're fighting an uphill battle against the likes of the SEC, the Big Ten, anything you can do to muster those so-called style points and bolster your position in the eyes of the national media, the talking heads out there, you got to take advantage of that. That's my personal vantage point on this. And it's coming to my mind literally as I'm talking about this. One of you in our Locked On Cougars Insider group, and I failed to remember who it was straight up, had a very good point that we were going back and forth via text yesterday. And we essentially came to the consensus that if BYU were winning games like they did against TCU literally every week, so it's like a 44-13 game, that's the number that BYU put up against TCU. If it was that type of a game where you're winning by 30 plus points every single week, there'd be no conversation about style points for BYU. I honestly believe that would be a dead and moot point. Yeah. The point is, you wouldn't be necessarily talking about as much as you are, but circumstances being what they are for BYU right now, they've had 3 comeback wins in Big 12 conference play. Their lone loss on the season was a butt kicking at the hands of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. You are battling a perception thing. Yes, there's guys like Dave Portnoy out there who are absolutely crowing and trying to pump up BYU, but there are just as many, if not more, on the other side. It's just saying, who's BYU really beat? What's their resume really look like? So that's kind of the give and take we're dealing with here when it comes to BYU. And I sincerely believe that when afforded the opportunity, much like they did against TCU on Saturday night, you need to make sure that margin is very significant and send a point or a shot across the bow of the College Football Playoff Committee and say, hey, we are worthy. We're capable of blowing these teams out. I know, like I said, Kalani wants to win with honor. He wants to make sure that he and his team are perceived very positively amongst his peers, because as he mentions, all he's really worried about is securing the wins. And winning, I say it on this podcast often, that is the number one thing that we root for as sports fans out there. You want your team or teams to have more points or more runs or whatever the scoring margin is than your opponent at the end of the game. That's all it really comes down to. But there are also circumstances where you get the chance, like they did against TCU, pouring it on just a little bit doesn't hurt in that circumstance, especially with the way that the Big 12 and BYU are perceived right now across the nation, at least from what I see in the terms of the chatter with the talking heads that are talking about the CFP, how the SEC should get 5 teams in, all this nonsense. So we'll see how it all goes. But I appreciate Kalani Sitake riffing on it and speaking out and speaking his mind on the matter all the same, and always appreciate him being as straightforward as he is, because that's one thing I've always appreciated about him. He doesn't pull punches. He's not a guy who's going to just say one thing and completely do another. He is a man of his word, and I appreciate him speaking out like he did to kind of set the record straight. All right, coming up next. Well, the record has been set a little straighter when it comes to BYU's revenue share plans, and it's very curious because it involves female athletes at BYU. It involves the honor code. And oh, by the way, a performance bonus. We're talking about all that next, coming up right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks and quite literally everything in between. If you want to take advantage of an opportunity with the Jazz against the Lakers, LeBron could be back tonight, everybody. Take advantage of it today. Plus, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game more exciting, especially when your team is making that late push late in those games. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. You heard that right. $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Simple as that. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with our friends over at FanDuel. They are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for helping us make the Locked On Podcast Network America's #1 sports podcast network, and appreciate all of you for your continued patronage of this show. Please continue to like it on YouTube, subscribe there, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review. And the #1 thing you can do as we start to get into the holiday season, and I say this every year on this podcast, we're 7 years running plus now, is that when you're around family and friends who are Cougar fans or of a similar ilk that are interested in the podcast sphere, hey, tell them this is daily BYU content you can't find anywhere else. It's available wherever you get your podcast, no matter what service you happen to use. And it's also available on YouTube. And just share with them this holiday season. And thank you in advance for your continued support. All right. So there was a podcast that just recently launched with the Deseret News called, I think it's Deseret Voices, if I recall correctly. And Jane Clayson Johnson, who is a preeminent journalist, been all over the national media for many, many years, stepped kind of into semi-retirement, but she's now back on that scene. She did a conversation, it was actually the debut episode of this podcast from the Deseret News, and I didn't know what to expect when I saw it pop up in my podcast feed. I was curious to listen to it because it's a new podcast, and trust me, I think any of you who know me, I work in a podcast sphere, so I'm going to listen to a lot of podcasts. It's just how I'm wired. But they were talking about revenue share and how BYU's place in the NIL world when it comes to college athletics is very curious. And a lot of the same storylines and talking points you've heard from Shane Reese and Keith Vorkink, as well as other BYU administrators, came up in that conversation about how BYU, they're not going to be the top bidder, but they'll always be in the mix. And they want to make sure they don't lose sight of the mission of BYU when it comes to athletics in this day and age when you can pay athletes millions of dollars, quite frankly. But there were three things in this conversation that came out of it that stood out to me beyond the typical stuff that we'd already heard about, how BYU is going to remain in the mix. They've got their donor base, obviously, heavily involved to make sure that they are a force in the NIL world. But they mentioned, speaking of Keith Vorkink as well as Shane Reese, that the BYU football program, they paid out their initial allotment when it came to the revenue share this past summer with the House settlement that came in July 1. They paid out the money to each of these athletes. All have an individual deal. They're not all the same amount of money. So it's stratified based on position and where you are in the depth chart and the like. But they added that later in the season, they said later in the season, there was a part of money, or I guess a set amount of money set aside for essentially football performance. That was curious to me that BYU has a pool of money that they're going to be handing out to players based on how this season either has gone, because they didn't say if they've paid it out yet or if it would be being paid out later. But that was curious to me that they held back some of this money to reward players who may have exceeded or stood out beyond maybe what their revenue share allotment was under the parameters going into the season. That was curious to me that came up, and I can appreciate the fact that BYU is making sure these players remain motivated. And you know what? One thing that's a very good motivator, I think, for most of us is money. So very curious to hear that. Now, they also did mention that the honor code is built into their revenue sharing. Reductions can come for violations of the honor code, your grades, and that was very curious to me that they have built this in. It's essentially an ethics clause into these contracts they sign with these athletes. I thought it was very interesting that violations of the honor code can see your allotment reduced when it comes to revenue share. And that apparently, the way I interpret it, comes across the board. It can come from, like I said, your grades starting to slip, that'll ding some of the money out of your pocket. Think of it as almost like a fine in a way. You don't live up to the honor code. Well, guess what? That's going to be a reduction in money as well. That was interesting to hear as well, because I think that may assuage some people's minds who are concerned that BYU has lost their way when it comes to the honor code. there have been some relaxations of interpretations and rules when it comes to the honor code. Dress and grooming standards are different now. I don't think I need to break it to anybody, but there are a lot of BYU athletes who got some longer hair and the like. But that's been in the works for quite a while. Any of you who are longtime everyday listeners, remember Connor Pay was growing his hair out for a long stretch of last season. It's because he said on the record that they had changed the whole dynamic when it came to your hair length, when it came to the honor code. It's no longer it has to be above the ear and above the collar, that type of stuff. That's out the window now. So, but interesting all the same to see the honor code is tied into this revenue share, and you have to live up to your end of the bargain. Speaking of the honor code, keeping your grades up if you want your full allotment of the revenue share. And then the final thing I took away from this on the female athlete side of things is they were very quick to point out that they had a current booster who had stepped up when NIL became a thing and was paying female athletes via NIL deals to make sure that they were also getting a cut of that pie. Too often we hear about the football programs and then basketball programs getting the lion's share of the revenue share and the NIL deals at any individual university, and BYU is not accepted from that. The way they made it sound like, and we had this individual on with me, it's the CEO of Smarty. They are featured pretty prominently in Lavelle Edwards Stadium as well. They're building a new headquarters over in Orem, just off I-15. And we had this individual, and the name is escaping me all of a sudden as I'm talking about this because I had it in my mind. But he came on this podcast and talked about what he was doing for female athletes at BYU and why he wanted to be involved with BYU athletics, but in a unique space. Jonathan Oliver, I think is who it was. Yeah, I think that's who it is. Yeah, Jonathan Oliver. He came on the show. This is like, man, when NIL first came about, so we're talking like 2021-ish, maybe even further back than that. It's been a long time. And I probably need to follow up on this, but they made it sound like that Smarty is still paying BYU female athletes. That is really cool to hear, that they are staying engaged and making sure that the female athletes at BYU who can often kind of be pushed aside essentially and ignored when it comes to NIL and revenue share and the like, that they are getting a cut of the pie as well. And I think also the insinuation I took away from it is there has been some revenue share allotted to female athletes under BYU's allotted $20.5 million that they can dole out to their athletes. So it was very interesting to hear, as candid as Shane Reese and Keith Vorkink were, that there are some parameters being put in place with BYU's revenue share. And I actually think that they're very common sense ones. Like I said, they don't want to lose sight of what they are. Speaking of BYU, it's a unique place. And the honor code, it really does set BYU apart. So they have built in those, I call it an ethics clause, an honor code clause into these contracts they sign with these athletes. They also, for football players, have an incentive pool. And that's I don't think there's a bad thing about that. You can make sure the athletes are performing to their highest level because there is a little bit of a carrot dangling out there if you perform at a high level, but also at the same time, they're not ignoring the female athletes at BYU either. And I think that's really, really cool to hear that if that is indeed the case, and I'll be sure to reach out to the Smarty and see if I can get Mr. Oliver back on the show to maybe get an update on that. I'd be very curious to see how that all is going, if that is indeed still the case. But, you know, it's cool to hear differences and new things that BYU is trying to do. But I do think it's the Cougars, speaking of BYU's university and athletic department, they're trying to innovate. And I appreciate the way that they're trying to do that. They're not just being everybody else out there. We hear all the time that BYU is a unique place. Well, that's some unique stuff. I don't think necessarily that many universities are tying in their student ethics clause, or in BYU's case, an honor code clause, into paying out these revenue shares. I would highly, highly doubt that very many universities, if any of them, have a similar type setup, but maybe they do. So very curious and cool stuff to hear about BYU. All right, coming up next, though, a guy who just recently joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I did not know this when I interviewed him, is Vai Fatuli. He's a freshman defensive tackle for BYU, really starting to see more and more time as the season wears on, and very much looks the part of one of those future building blocks for BYU along their defensive front. We had a great conversation, essentially get to know you, and allowed him to kind of explain what brought him to BYU and why he enjoys playing in this system that Jay Hill and Kalani Sitake have built, and just the program overall. We'll get to that exclusive conversation coming up next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends up at Woodward. We're just going to say it, the fun per foot ratio at Woodward Park City is second to none. Located just 20 minutes from Salt Lake Valley, Woodward offers experiential learning in a radically fun and safe environment with facilities for all abilities. The best part is the door is always open to first-timers and regulars alike. Bounce from park to pits, ramps to tramps, and back again. And you know who what Woodward is all about. They are the action sports mecca for athletes in this state. It's incredible. They have Mountain Park season passes are currently on sale for just $499. Rip hot laps with a pause after school and into the evening. Maximize mountain time this winter at one of the best terrain parks in Utah all season long. If you're looking to go all in, they have all access memberships providing just that, from passes to perks, discounts, and more. So if you're just starting out, learning to fly with the Woodward Tribe and seasonal and multi-week programs that build your skills and confidence in a stoke-inspiring environment, and just 20 minutes from Salt Lake, once again, Woodward offers experiential learning with facilities for all abilities. Learn more today at woodwardparkcity.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not signed up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, what are you waiting for? Get the inside scoop on all things BYU, football, basketball, and really anything I've got for you guys. Come into your phone in the form of a text message. You can join by clicking the link in the show notes below, or reach out to us via social media or email, and we'll get you squared away as a new member of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, so I had a chance last week to catch up with Vai Fatuli. Now, you probably have noticed a guy wearing the number 99 out there for BYU, and he is a guy, speaking of Vi, that I was very curious to get to know because he's a young player. He's from La Habra High School down there in La Habra, California, and I started to see him, especially with guys like Anisi Purcell and Justin Kirkland, shelved due to some injuries recently, to see him start to really kind of emerge into one of the backup roles at defensive tackle for BYU. And I just said, you know what? I want to get to know this young man. And I came away uber impressed with his poise. His, what you're about to hear is a guy who is well-versed in talking with people. Just, I was really, really impressed. The conversation, the wisdom, just the I don't know, the maturity that this kid has. And at the time when we did this interview last Wednesday, I think if I recall correctly, I did not have any foreknowledge that this past weekend on Sunday, he was going to be baptized a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I had no idea that was going to happen. So congratulations, first off, in order to Vi for his decision to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's really cool in and of itself, but it also shows that BYU football, once again, stands for a whole lot more than just a really, really good football program. It stands as a representative of Brigham Young University, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it truly is a missionary tool. So without further ado, here's the conversation that Vai Fatuli and I had last week after BYU football practice.
A lot of people have probably been watching games and seeing a number 99 all of a sudden out there on the football field. So how good is it to finally be playing football as a freshman here at BYU?
Man, you know, I'm in a position right now where I feel like I can succeed, especially with Coach Hill and, you know, my coach, Coach Pua.
Yeah.
You know, we're closing into those last 4 games where I could play, you know, with the red shirt. Obviously, I played in the Iowa State game. Those were my first snaps, and I'm confident in my ability as ever, and especially with the, you know, coaching that Coach Hill gives us, you know, the little pointers here and there, but it feels great. I love it here.
Now, circumstances obviously have led to you being on the field. What have they told you? Like, what are they expecting from you, essentially?
Honestly, a big thing is here is everyone do their 111, so I feel like, you know, with my coach, Coach Hill, especially, you know, with our little talks, just make sure you do your job and you do it with effort. You know, a big saying in our room is you can't block effort. Effort is unblockable, especially in our room. So I think, you know, I expect from myself, and what I think the coaches expect from me is effort, effort.
Now, you're a young player, obviously, but do you feel like you fit into this defense as young as you are?
Oh, yeah. The thing about our coaches is they make it really easy for us. You know, Coach Hill, he has a lot of, you know, plays, formations, whatnot, but they make it so easy with the way their ability to coach and everything they give us. So I feel like I fit in perfect, and I love it here. Again, I love it here.
What sold you on BYU originally?
So it's actually like a funny thing. Like my dad and I, like we grew up in California. Well, we grew up in Hawaii.
Yes.
But I went to high school in California. So, you know, growing up in Cali, I grew up in the church, but, you know, I never watched BYU games growing up, which is, I hate to say it, but I was always a big USC fan. But, you know, when I took my visit here, Coach Pua, the love I got, the life after football, man, it's like no other. So I feel like when I first got here, I believed in Coach Hill. I had faith in him. it just sold me there.
Now, obviously, you're working with Coach Puha on a daily basis. How instrumental has he been in terms of getting you up to speed in this defense?
The thing about Coach Puha, a lot different from other coaches, especially on the other visits I took, but the way he uses love to back up and really be that backbone of your ability to play. And I feel like the foundation he gives us, built on love and trust, instead of, like a lot of, I don't know how to put it, but a lot of coaches think that yelling and screaming is the way to go, but Coach Puha, if you watch him coach, he is never yell. He never does anything on the field. Always backs it up with love, and I feel like that has really, especially when I'm hard on myself. I feel like,
Yeah.
So having that kind of like yin and yang thing, I love it. I love his coaching style. I love everything about it. So
now I'm gonna ask you a question I asked him, because he's obviously played at a very, very high level. Played in the NFL, was a star at Utah, all those different things. I asked him if he ever talks about his playing days with his players, and he said, "I'm no Uncle Rico," essentially. Does he ever bring that up?
He doesn't really bring it up, but if you look and really listen to how he coaches us, you would understand, oh man, this guy knows what he's talking about. Especially in stopping the run. Man, he's like no other.
Fair enough. So there's hints of it, I guess.
There's definitely hints of it where
Okay.
you could be like, oh damn, he knows exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah.
If I just trust and believe in his plan, I'm gonna be in the exact position that he was in. So just having faith in that and really I don't know, just giving it all, putting all my effort into that and buying in almost,
I want to ask you about working with a guy like Keanu Tanavasa, because he came with such so many headlines, I guess, and hype about him. What's he been like in terms of working with you and the rest of the defensive line?
Man, I love the older guys in our room. They've been, so I'm an only child, and growing up, I never really had that older brother love. It was always maybe my cousins, my parents, but they are the best big brothers I could have asked for. A lot of colleges, and there's a lot of stigmas around older guys and them teaching younger guys, giving them the cold shoulder, but they embraced me, they coached me up. I'm almost chasing to be like what they are for me. For me, my game, I like to pick apart their brains in film. I like to, really watch them and take little things from each, even JT.
Yeah.
I'll take a little bit of Keanu, I'll take a little bit of JT, try to implement it in my game, because I'm a young guy, and I feel like being a freshman, you don't really find your game yet until, you get a little older. But having those older guys who have so many games under their belt, I love it. And I'm in the best position with them next to me. So,
okay, I got two more questions for you. So number one, why number 99?
So
some guys get it assigned, other guys pick it. So
I wanted number 11 because that's what I wore in high school. But I'm a D tackle now, so.
Hey, you can still wear 11 as a D tackle.
Honestly, I love the double digit numbers that are the same. So 11, 99, 55. I love those kinds of numbers. And shout out Josh Singh, because that's big bro right there. And he was my guy on the visit that drove me around, showed me whatnot. But that's my guy. So. I love 99 too.
Got it. Okay, so it's Josh Singh Memorial. I like
kinda.
He's killing it at Vanderbilt. It's fun to watch him doing his thing.
I know. I call him every week and just chop it up with him because that's like my older brother too.
He has a YEA connection, obviously, with you too. Now, final thing, what do you hope to accomplish the rest of the season?
Honestly, with the games I'm allowed to play within that redshirt year, I just want to impact the game the most I can, make my plays that show up to me, do my job, do my 1/11th, and to be honest, being the freshman, I'm really gonna soak it all in and just be the juice man of this. If I'm inside, if I'm on the sideline, I'm just gonna hype everyone up. That's all. That's me. So I feel like that's the best version of myself I could bring for everyone else. So
awesome. Well, Vai, thanks for the time, man.
Appreciate you.
There you have it. A big thank you to Vai Fatuli for taking the time to talk with myself. And once again, big congratulations on him on making a really life-defining decision to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's a really, really big step in any person's life, no matter when they take that step. But I think his maturity, as I said, was really off the charts. And I really enjoyed getting to know him. You can tell this is a kid that is wise beyond his years. He understands his role at BYU. He understands what he hopes to accomplish in a Cougar uniform. And him, Nusi Tamwe Apao, Tausili Akana, Kinalafono Hema, Hunter Clegg, Kendall Wall, the young bucks on this defensive line for BYU. The future looks really, really bright. And doesn't preclude the upperclassmen, the Bodie Schoonovers, the Vili Pujas, even guys like Logan Latui, Keanu Tanavasa, Anisi Purcell. They've got a lot of talent on that defensive front. And I think as it really starts to kind of get ingrained in the culture of BYU, it's only get better and better and better. And you can tell that a guy like Vi understands what a defense like Jay Hills can do for him personally. And you can tell he hopes to accomplish a whole lot in a Cougar uniform along that path. All right. So once again, a big thank you to Vai Fatuli, big thank you to BYU Athletic Communications for arranging the interview, and really, really cool stuff. I always enjoy these conversations, and I hope you guys enjoy them as much as I enjoy bringing them to you. All right. That's going to do it for this Tuesday edition of the show. Coming up tomorrow, supposed to catch up with Drake Toll at some point this week. We're also supposed to do a crossover edition with Jeff Carr of Locked On Bearcats. So stay tuned for those conversations, maybe tomorrow and Thursday, but also coming up later this week, getting you ready. BYU in Cincinnati, huge showdown for the Cougars, and they can get some style points against Cincinnati. I don't think it would hurt doing that on the road, but we'll talk more about that as the week progresses right here on Locked On Cougars. As always, once again, thank you for subscribing, rating, and reviewing. If you haven't done so already on YouTube, if you're watching this, click that little thumbs up icon right now. It's all I'm asking for, you guys. Do that and continue to support this show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. We'll catch you guys again tomorrow. Those of you who are everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.